Elena stood before the mirror adjusting the lace of her wedding dress. It shimmered in the soft light, a symbol of all she had dreamed about. Today, she was marrying James, the man she had loved for years. But despite the excitement, a knot of unease settled in her stomach. It wasn't the wedding itself that caused her nerves. It was the unspoken tension with her mother, Margaret. Elena thought about her relationship with Margaret, her emotionally distant mother. For years, Elena had sought her approval, never quite feeling good enough. Margaret's love always came with conditions, and Elena had spent her life trying to meet those expectations. The dress wasn't just a beautiful gown. It was an heirloom, passed down from Margaret, a constant reminder of the expectations she had never fully met. Elena's heart ached as she considered the weight it carried, not just on her shoulders but in her heart. Max, her dog, nudged her gently. His wagging tail was a comfort in the midst of the growing tension. Unlike her mother, Max offered unconditional love, something Elena clung to during this stressful time. Elena rushed around the bedroom, her mind buzzing with last-minute tasks. Her wedding day was here, but despite the excitement, she couldn't shake the growing anxiety. The wedding dress, a treasured heirloom, lay on the bed, glowing under the soft light. But she couldn't focus on it for long. The clock was ticking. She glanced at it again and again. The ceremony was just hours away, and everything had to be perfect. She turned away from the bed to check the final details. The dress would be the centerpiece of the day, and her heart ached with the weight of her mother's expectations. This day wasn't just about her. It was about fulfilling a family legacy. But in the back of her mind, Elena knew it wasn't just the dress she had to worry about. It was her mother's judgment that loomed over her. Always there, always critical. Max, her loyal dog, burst into the room with his usual enthusiasm. His tail wagged furiously, and his eyes sparkled with joy. He had no idea what was going on. Only that Elena was moving quickly, and he wanted to be a part of it. With a playful bark, Max jumped onto the bed, his paws landing on the soft fabric of the dress. He didn't understand the significance of the gown. It was just a place to play, and his energy, though innocent, was about to cause trouble. As Max bounded around, his paws scraped across the fabric, leaving behind a visible scratch. Elena didn't notice him at first. She was too preoccupied with the mounting pressure. But that would soon change. Elena entered the room again, her mind filled with 100 thoughts. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw the bed. She froze. There, on the wedding dress, was the unmistakable scratch, deep and jagged, marking the fabric in a way she couldn't ignore. Her breath caught. No, this wasn't happening. Not today. She rushed to the bed, her hands trembling as she touched the damaged area. Couldn't be fixed. This was more than just a dress. It was a symbol of her family, a tradition passed down from her mother. The thought of facing her mother with this ruin filled Elena with dread. The room seemed to close in around Elena. She felt the walls tightening, her chest tightening as panic gripped her. The wedding was hours away. She had no time, no way to fix it. A sense of helplessness flooded over her. The dress, the one thing she couldn't afford to ruin, was now a symbol of failure. Her mind raced. Would her mother notice? Could she hide it? The thoughts spiraled, and she couldn't calm down. Elena knew that this mistake would be seen as a reflection of everything her mother disapproved of. Her inability to live up to the expectations placed on her for so long. Max sat in the corner, his head lowered, watching Elena with a look of confusion in his eyes. His tail stopped wagging. He knew something was wrong, but he had no idea what. Elena turned to him, the anger rising within her. "Why did you do this?" she whispered, her voice trembling with frustration. She knelt beside him, but her hands were tight with emotion. She loved him, but right now, all she could feel was betrayal. Max hadn't meant to do it, but in that moment, it felt like he had destroyed everything. Max's eyes were filled with apology, but the damage was already done. Elena's love for him couldn't fix the tear in the dress or in her heart. She struggled to stay composed, but it was hard. Every part of her screamed for some kind of solution. Just as Elena thought she might breathe, the door swung open. Margaret, her mother, entered with the same coldness that had always been her hallmark. Her eyes immediately locked on the dress. The moment her gaze landed on the fabric, she gasped, then turned to Max. "What did that dog do to the dress?" she demanded. Her tone was icy, sharp as glass. Elena opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Margaret's reaction was swift and angry. "This is unforgivable," she hissed. The cold disappointment in her voice was like a slap. Elena felt her stomach churn. "Mom, it wasn't his fault," Elena tried to explain, her voice soft, but Margaret wasn't listening. Elena's chest tightened. She loved Max, but she knew that standing up for him might make her mother angrier. There was no way to make this right, no way to fix the dress. The emotional weight of the situation began to suffocate her. She had always tried to please her mother, but now, she wasn't sure if that was even possible. Should she defend Max or accept the anger coming from the woman who had shaped her life with criticism? The tension in the room grew unbearable. It wasn't just the dress anymore. It was the years of emotional distance between them. Margaret's harsh words reminded Elena of the ways she had never been able to measure up in her mother's eyes. The dress wasn't just ruined. It was a reflection of the broken bond between them, a symbol of the years of unmet expectations. Elena looked at the damaged dress, then at Max, and finally at her mother. She felt trapped, suffocated by the weight of everything. The wedding was supposed to be a moment of joy, but now it felt impossible to enjoy. The dress was ruined, her mother was furious, and she felt powerless to change anything. Max sat at her feet, his eyes wide with worry. Elena, still reeling from the shock, realized something. There was no easy fix for this, either in her life or in the family she was caught between. Elena sat quietly in the room, her eyes fixed on the wedding dress hanging in the corner. Her mind drifted back to her childhood, to the day everything changed. Her father's death had left a hole in their family that her mother, Margaret, could never seem to fill. Margaret became a shadow of herself, retreating further into her grief, leaving Elena to fend for herself. She remembered the silence that filled their home, a silence that was louder than words. As a little girl, Elena had tried to reach out to her mother, desperate for affection. She would run into Margaret's arms, but the embrace was always cold, distant. Her mother's eyes were vacant, and no amount of Elena's love could break through that wall. Each time Elena tried, her mother withdrew further, creating an emotional gap that Elena couldn't understand. She longed for a kind word, a smile, but it never came. When her mother's coldness became too much, Elena turned to Max, her dog. Max was always there, his wagging tail a constant comfort. He didn't need anything from Elena, except her company. Max loved her without conditions, without judgment. His loyalty and affection filled the emptiness her mother's distance had created. With Max, Elena wasn't invisible. She was loved. Max became more than just a pet. He was Elena's anchor in a world that felt unstable. While Margaret's neglect stung, Max's presence was a soothing balm. He never judged, never pulled away. Elena realized that Max gave her what her mother couldn't: unconditional love and unwavering support. As Elena sat on the couch, she couldn't help but compare the warmth Max gave her to the coldness she felt from her mother. Max had always been there, a constant source of affection. But her mother? Elena had spent years trying to earn her love, only to be met with rejection. The contrast was painful, and Elena felt torn between the two. A mother who could never truly love her and a dog who loved her without question. Her thoughts shifted to the wedding dress. It wasn't just fabric. It was a family tradition, a symbol of her mother's expectations. Margaret had insisted it be passed down to Elena, a piece of their family's legacy. But Elena couldn't help but feel the weight of it. The dress was beautiful, but it also felt like a chain, a symbol of all the things she had never been able to achieve in her mother's eyes. As she adjusted the dress, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that it represented everything she had tried and failed to do. It wasn't just a gown. It was a reminder of her mother's unspoken demands, of the approval Elena had spent her life chasing but never received. The dress was beautiful, yes, but it also carried a history of unfulfilled expectations, and that weight felt heavier than ever. The clock on the wall ticked away relentlessly. Elena glanced at it, her heart racing. The wedding was just hours away, and the dress, her mother's precious heirloom, still lay in the corner, its delicate fabric marred by an unforgivable scratch. Every time she looked at it, panic set in again. How could she fix it? How could she make it perfect? The wedding wasn't just about love. It was about family, tradition, and meeting her mother's impossible standards. She couldn't fail today. Not now. Not when it meant so much to Margaret. Elena's hands trembled as she grabbed the needle and thread, trying to stitch the fabric together. But no matter how carefully she worked, the stitch lines were visible, the damage too deep. Frustration swelled inside her. She tried fabric glue next, but the patch only made the dress look worse. stiff and unnatural. The lace she added to cover the scratch seemed out of place, an awkward attempt to fix what couldn't be fixed. Each attempt to repair it felt like another failure. She couldn't stop herself from feeling like she was failing the one person who had always expected perfection from her, her mother. Desperation drove Elena to a bridal shop, hoping to find something, anything, that could replace the damaged dress. She moved from one gown to the next, each one more wrong than the last. The white silk of one dress seemed too cold, the lace of another too gaudy. None of them felt right. None of them were hers. She tried to picture herself walking down the aisle in one of these dresses, but it didn't feel like her moment anymore. Nothing felt like it could fix the mess she'd made. The disappointment in Margaret's eyes loomed in her mind. She could feel it even now, heavy on her chest. Back at home, with the wedding just hours away, Elena couldn't breathe. Her anxiety weighed down on her like a 1,000-pound stone. She couldn't even look at the dress without seeing her mother's disapproving gaze. Margaret had always expected perfection from her, and Elena had spent her whole life trying to meet those impossible standards. Now, as her wedding day approached, the weight of those expectations seemed unbearable. She could almost hear her mother's sharp words cutting through the silence. "You should have been more careful. You've ruined everything." Elena closed her eyes, trying to block out the noise in her head, but it was there, relentless. The final straw came when Margaret entered the room, her eyes immediately falling on the damaged dress. "What have you done?" Margaret's voice was cold, laced with anger. Elena's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to scream, to let it all out. "It was an accident," she cried, but her voice cracked. "I've tried everything. I fixed it and it's still ruined. What do you want from me?" Margaret's disappointment was sharp, cutting into Elena like a knife. And in that moment, everything broke. "You've always made me feel like I wasn't good enough. Nothing was ever enough for you," Elena shouted, her voice trembling with years of pent-up emotion. The words, once buried deep inside, erupted like a flood. Margaret stood frozen, her face unreadable. Then, in a soft voice that barely reached Elena's ears, she spoke. "I didn't know how to love you after your father died. I was so lost in my grief. I couldn't give you the affection you needed." Elena froze, the anger draining from her body as she processed her mother's words. She had never known this about Margaret. For all the coldness, the distance, there had been a woman who didn't know how to hold her child. Tears welled up in Elena's eyes, the years of confusion and hurt flooding her heart. "I just wanted to feel like I mattered to you," Elena whispered, her voice breaking. The silence between them was thick, but it was different now. It wasn't just silence. It was understanding, raw and painful, but honest. Exhausted, emotionally spent, Elena sank into a chair, her body heavy with the weight of the moment. She stared at the dress again, the scratch still glaring at her. For the first time, she realized something that shook her to the core. The dress wasn't perfect. She wasn't perfect. And neither was her relationship with her mother. Elena had spent so long trying to make everything flawless. Her wedding, her mother's expectations. But all it did was leave her broken. The dress wasn't going to be perfect, and neither was the day, but maybe that was okay. Maybe that was the lesson she needed to learn. Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her. Letting go of the need for perfection felt like shedding a weight she had been carrying for so long. The scratch on the dress no longer seemed like a tragedy. It was a reminder that nothing, not even family, could be perfect. And that was okay. She didn't need her mother's approval to be worthy. She didn't need to be perfect to be loved. For the first time in years, Elena allowed herself to breathe freely. With a deep breath, Elena stood up, her mind made up. The wedding was still happening, and she was going to walk down that aisle, imperfections and all. She had made peace with the dress and, more importantly, with herself. Elena knew now that perfection wasn't the goal. Healing, acceptance, and love were. And as she faced her mother one last time before the ceremony, she didn't feel fear anymore. She felt strength. And with that strength, she knew she was ready to embrace whatever came next. Elena stood in front of the wedding dress, her heart racing. The scratch marred its delicate fabric, a mistake she couldn't seem to fix. Desperation had led her through every attempt. Sewing, fabric glue, and even lace. But nothing had worked. It was still there. The flaw, the imperfection. Her fingers brushed the fabric one last time when they caught on something different. A ridge, faint yet distinct. Confused, Elena carefully peeled back the fabric. Beneath the tear, she saw something that took her breath away, an embroidered message hidden under the surface. Her heart skipped a beat as she traced the delicate stitches, the words slowly becoming clear. To my beloved Elena, forever with you. Elena froze. Her mind raced. Could it really be? Her father, who had been gone for so long, had left a message for her. Her eyes welled with tears as she slowly reread the words, each stitch a testament to his love. The dress, once a symbol of family expectations, now felt so much deeper, carrying the memory of her father's love, woven into the very fabric. She gently touched the words, feeling her father's presence, as though he had never truly left. The scratch, once a source of frustration, now felt like a blessing, a connection to him, as if his love had been there all along, waiting for her to find it. The tears she had once shed out of frustration turned into something else. Grief, yes, but also peace. The imperfection in the dress wasn't a mistake. It was a symbol of love, of the bond she shared with her father. The flaw, the tear, now seemed sacred. She no longer felt weighed down by the pressure to make things perfect. In fact, she began to understand that her imperfections, and the ones in her life, were part of what made her who she was. The scratch, once seen as a blemish, had become a gift. Her father's way of telling her that no matter what happened, his love would always be a part of her. Elena wiped away the tears that had gathered in her eyes. The scratch wasn't something to hide or fix. It was a part of her father's legacy, a mark of his love. The dress, just like her, was not perfect, but it was still beautiful. She began to see that imperfection could hold meaning and beauty. She stood back and smiled softly, finally accepting that the dress, her father's message, was exactly as it was meant to be. It wasn't a flaw, it was a reminder of the love she'd lost and the love she still carried with her. And she didn't need to fix it. She didn't need to be perfect. Elena walked to find her mother. The revelation had opened her eyes, and she knew it was time to share it. She found Margaret sitting quietly in the living room, her face weary. Elena stood before her, holding the dress in her hands, and gently unfolded it. "Mom, I found something in the dress," Elena said softly, her voice filled with wonder. Margaret looked up, her brow furrowed. Elena showed her the embroidered message, and her mother's eyes widened. She read the words, and then her gaze met Elena's. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I didn't know," Margaret whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know your father had done this." "I didn't either," Elena replied, her voice trembling. "But now, I understand. It's not just a dress. It's a piece of him. A message that he's always been with me." Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she reached out and took Elena's hands. "I'm sorry, Elena. I never knew how to show you, how to express my love after your father passed. I thought keeping things together was all I could do." Elena squeezed her hand, understanding now. "It's okay, Mom. I understand now. We've both been trying to hold on to something, trying to make everything perfect. But it's okay to let go of that." The two women stood together, the weight of the years between them lifting, replaced by the understanding they had long needed. The dress, with its hidden message, had become more than just fabric. It was a symbol of love, imperfection, and the bond between them. Elena smiled softly as she and her mother stood in the room, the dress between them. There was no need for perfection anymore, no need to hold on to the past. They had found a new way to connect, a way to heal the wounds that had lingered for so long. And as they moved forward, Elena knew that both she and the dress would carry a part of her father's love with them, forever. Elena stood in front of the mirror, her heart racing. The wedding dress shimmered under the soft light, its beauty undeniable. But there it was, the scratch, the imperfection that had caused so much worry. She had spent so long trying to fix it, thinking the day wouldn't be complete unless everything was flawless. But as she gazed at herself now, something had shifted. The scratch no longer seemed like a flaw, it was part of the dress, part of her journey. Her fingers brushed over the delicate fabric where the message from her father was stitched. "To my beloved Elena, forever with you." She closed her eyes, feeling her father's love wash over her once more. The imperfections were not mistakes. They were reminders of her growth, her resilience. She stood up straighter, a quiet sense of peace settling in. The wedding was not about perfection, she realized. It was about love. And the dress, with its small tear and its hidden message, symbolized that love, raw, real, and full of history. For the first time in what felt like forever, Elena could breathe. She let go of the pressure, the weight of everyone's expectations, and focused on what truly mattered, her love for James, the man who had stood by her through it all. The imperfections in the dress mirrored her own struggles, her own triumphs. It was a part of her journey, and now she could wear it with pride. The past, the fights, the broken expectations, none of it mattered anymore. This day was not about a perfect dress, a flawless ceremony, or meeting anyone's standards. It was about healing. It was about stepping into the future with James by her side, with her family healed, and with the love that had carried her through the hardest times. As Elena took a deep breath, her thoughts turned to her mother. She thought about the years of emotional distance, the walls that had kept them apart. But now she understood. Her mother had never stopped loving her. She had simply been buried in grief after losing her husband. Elena now saw the love in her mother's eyes. She saw the effort, the hope, even when Margaret couldn't express it. This day, this wedding wasn't just about Elena and James. It was about healing old wounds, mending the ties that had frayed over time. And in that moment, Elena realized how much her mother, and Max, had helped her get to this point. They were all part of this celebration, this new chapter in her life. Max, the dog who had caused the scratch in the first place, stood quietly by Elena's side. His big, brown eyes met hers, full of loyalty, love, and an innocent understanding. In a strange way, Max had been a catalyst for everything. The scratch that started it all, the discovery of the hidden message, the healing of old wounds. Elena smiled softly, bending down to give him a gentle pat on the head. "Thank you, Max," she whispered, her heart full of gratitude. Max wagged his tail as if he understood, and Elena couldn't help but laugh, her heart swelling with affection for the dog who had unknowingly played such an important role in her journey. The music began to play, soft and sweet. Elena stepped into the aisle, her hand resting gently on her father's old arm. She felt his presence with her in that moment. The love he had left behind, the message in the dress, guiding her forward. As she walked toward James, she felt a sense of peace, a calm that had been absent for so long. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a moment of connection. A connection with her past, her family, and her future. The imperfections of the dress, the ceremony, and her relationship now seemed like a reflection of the true nature of life, love, loss, and acceptance. And as Elena neared James, her heart swelled with love and gratitude, knowing she was walking into a future filled with hope, not perfection. When Elena finally reached James, her heart was full. The worries, the flaws, the stress, all of it melted away. The dress no longer mattered. The scratch, the tears, the struggles. They were a part of her journey, but they didn't define her. Standing before James, she knew that this moment was about so much more than what was on her body or what anyone expected. It was about the love they shared, the way they had healed together, and the life they would build. The wedding was a celebration of that love, a love that had overcome so much. The ceremony wasn't just about the dress, the flowers, or the perfection of the day. It was about the deeper connections, the love between Elena and James, the reconciliation with her mother, the bond with her father that still lingered in the fabric of the dress. Elena took James's hand, looking into his eyes with a smile that spoke of everything she had learned. She was no longer focused on the imperfections, because she knew that love was the one thing that would always remain, no matter what. And in that moment, Elena felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the most beautiful thing about her wedding day wasn't the dress, but the love that had carried her here. Elena stood in front of the mirror, taking in the soft glow of the morning light. The wedding day had come and gone, but the lessons from it lingered. She thought back to all the struggles, the anxiety over the scratch, the tension with her mother, the uncertainty that had clouded her heart. But now, with time to reflect, she saw how far she had come. The imperfection in the dress, which once felt like a flaw, had become a symbol of her own growth. She'd learned to accept that life wasn't about perfection. It was about love, healing, and the ability to move forward. The emotional weight she'd carried from her past had lightened. Her mother's distance, once so painful, now made sense. She understood her mother's grief and how it shaped their relationship. The dress wasn't just a wedding gown anymore. It was a symbol of love, a love that had been passed down, even through the imperfections. The scratch that had once bothered her so much now felt like a mark of transformation. It reminded her of the love from both her parents, the love of her father, who had left her the hidden message, and the love of her mother, who had kept the family legacy alive. That message, "To my beloved Elena, forever with you," was no longer just stitching on fabric. It was a connection to the past, a bond that she would carry with her forever. She wasn't just wearing a dress. She was wearing a piece of her family's love, woven together with every stitch and every memory. Elena now saw the dress as more than just a family heirloom. It was the story of her family, a story of love, loss, and the complicated ties that bound them together. The hidden message her father left her wasn't just a note. It was a part of their legacy. The scratch, the imperfection that had caused so much stress, was no longer a flaw. It was a symbol of healing. Elena's relationship with her mother, once distant and strained, now felt renewed. She understood her mother's pain and the way she tried to keep her father's memory alive through the dress. The family's history, full of both sorrow and love, had shaped her. Now she embraced it, understanding that imperfections were part of their story. With a sense of peace in her heart, Elena knew she was ready for the future. The past had shaped her, but it didn't define her. She had learned that love and acceptance were the keys to moving forward, and the imperfections in life were just part of the journey. As she looked ahead to her life with James, Elena knew there would be challenges. But now, with the lessons she had learned, she was ready to face them. The dress, once just fabric, was now a symbol of strength, healing, and love, a perfect reflection of the life she was about to begin.